Hey, this is Ralph, and in this video I want to keep working on our mobile navigation menus assignment. And let's see, where did we leave off? So I believe at the end of the last video we had just created a container basically for our example menus. And I had just started to position the frame for one of them. So before starting this video, I put in a little bit more detail. Let's go ahead and jump to the code, the HTML. HTML is painfully simple at the moment. I simply have 3 divs, and then for each of those divs, they are uniquely identified. Now the CSS is where I got a little bit more customization, nothing too dramatic though. All 3 of my phone frames basically have a red visible border, and they're all being positioned absolute. Then I just took some time, little by little. I adjusted the location for each of those red frames. I gave them some width, I gave them some height. All of my phone models are different sizes, so they all needed to be adjusted. And I even threw in a little bit of border radius just so we could have those kind of tight-fitting shapes. And you can kind of see what I've got here. I know these red lines are tough to see, but yeah, I roughly positioned each of these phone frames within or over the background in the appropriate spot. And I try to do a little border radius here and there. And that's basically going to be my boundary, my stage for working on my mobile navigation menus. So in this video, I want to start to set up some key structures. Now, I do have some mobile menus to show you, but it doesn't really matter at this stage of the game. At least let's get us started into how we're going to structure the HTML and the basic CSS for each of these phone models, and then we can look at some examples of some mobile navigation menus so that we can start to play around with customizations for 3 different examples here on basically 3 different phone sizes. There's not a lot of deviation though. So let's head back over to the HTML first. And what I'm going to do here is I'll go ahead and set up one of my phone HTML sections, and then the others will be very, very similar. We can do a little copying and pasting. So basically, the div phone frame isn't going to change very much. Let's zoom in a little bit on this. But what I want to have inside of that is going to change. I'm going to end up having a nav. Let's do a nav tag. And I would like to write this in a specific way, and I'm going to use a class. Class equals mobile menu space, and then I'm going to just do open for mobile menu open. Basically, I want to rig this so that there's very little that I have to change from an open state menu to a closed state menu. And if I can rig it so that, or if we can rig it so that the only thing we need to change is a class value, that's fantastic, because that means then later on it's going to be easy to use JavaScript to simply change the value of the class for the nav, and we can do a number of different things. You know, we can slide that nav menu out of the way, or drop it down, or drop it up, whatever we need to do. So inside, I don't want to have a lot of classes that need to change. Hopefully we won't have any, and all can be controlled right up here. Now, well, why 2? Well, I want to have one class that's going to control most of the visual characteristics of the mobile navigation menu, and I want to have a separate class that's just going to kind of control how it's visible to the user or how it's hidden from the user. We'll see in a moment, pretty much all navigation menus for mobile need to be in a position where they can get rid of themselves or hide away, tucked out of the way, because our screen real estate is so limited, you can't usually leave the mobile menu open all the time. So usually not as practical. Okay, now within that, ultimately, we are going to have an unordered list and a series of list items in here, but I'm going to get to that later on as well. What I think I will go ahead and throw on though, down near the bottom, I'm going to go ahead and pretend that I'm going to have a button set up. And I'll just, since this is going to be the open state of my menu, my button will read close. That's it. We'll just do a bare minimal styling on that in the short term. So that's basically what I've got going. And because so far this is all pretty standard stuff, I can safely assume that each of my phone frames are going to have that same basic thing. Let me put a few more line breaks in here too, just so we can see that we're separating this. Now my goal isn't to spend a lot of time working on all three of these phones at the same time. That could be pretty confusing. However, there are a few foundational things we can certainly do with our phones at the same time before we start working on the details for one phone at a time. So I'm feeling pretty good about this HTML. Of course, I've already got autosave on, but I'll do Control S just to make sure. Of course, we haven't done anything dramatic enough to go check. Let's jump over to the CSS and see what we can do to kind of organize the styling of these navigation menus. So on the CSS, try to clean things up a little bit. Obviously, I've got a few rules on here from before, just kind of controlling page characteristics overall. I've got a rule here that's controlling equal characteristics for all three of my phone frames. But I'm going to head down here, and just above my phone frame 1 rule, I am going to, let's just go ahead and create ourselves a nice little divider. Unique styles for phone frame number 1. Okay. And I'm doing this basically because as we start working on a big CSS file like this, it can be pretty easy to get one confused with the other. And then I can simply copy that, paste and paste, give myself little breaks here. That's number 2. A little room to work and a little room to work. So I'm going to focus on one of these, and we'll see that we can probably do some things that are similar to the others. So my first phone frame, nothing fancy on here, by the way. What you're looking at, this is simply the positioning, the width and height of that red frame that I have on the phone. So once again, here we go. It's that red frame that I have right there. You can already see my default button showing up. It's very, very tiny, of course, here. We're going to adjust that, certainly. So, yep, so that's just that frame, and I'm focusing my attention on this first phone over here on the left. Now, what I'm going to do in here is phone frame 1, okay? Now I'm doing that because I'm going to have slightly different styles for each phone model. So I am going to be referencing that ID, that parent ID, which is the div. It is a div, right? Yep, it's a div, phone frame 1. Okay, then I'm going to go into the child here, nav.mobile menu. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of help focus my attention on that mobile menu for the first one. And let's see, I'm going to do something like, let's give it a background color, and I'll do HSLA, hue, saturation, light, alpha transparency. And it's remembering the one I've done before. The next one I'm going to do is be pretty similar. So I'll do 90, 100%, comma, 50%, comma, 70%. Somewhat transparent. It makes this bright shade of green that I'm kind of fond of. Cool, so we're going to go ahead and get that. And actually, let's see what we get with anything like this, if anything. Now remember, this is a nav element, which is a block element, and I am seeing a little bit of something. It's just because that button is there. Normally this thing would have just scrunched up on itself because its height is default of auto. Now, if the height was something like 100%, we would see that it fills up that space pretty well, and I'm actually kind of happy with that. However, I think I will do something like, we could do a height of 80%. That's not bad. And obviously, then it's going to kind of be limited there. Now, I don't want to do something too constraining. Of course, we may adjust this later on with a min height in there, because we don't necessarily know the phone device that the user is going to be on. We don't know how much height we have to deal with. So my first thought is to take this button to close or open the menu and maybe stick it down here at the bottom for now, just so we can see how that'll work. So let's try something like that. And then I'll come back to this height. Now, since I know I'm going to be positioning that button, I'm going to go ahead and slap on a position relative, if I can spell it, to my nav mobile menu, and then I could come down here and create a place for that button. So phone frame 1 nav dot actually, I might change this to nav.mmopen space button. So we can kind of space this button in a key spot. Remember, the button is a descendant of the nav under the mmopen. Now, the reason I'm doing this one is because later on, if we're going to use some JavaScript to change out what the value of the nav is, mmopen could very well change to nothing or mmclosed or so. So my button now, for now, is going to be position absolute. Now, whenever I start to position something, oh, I looked a little funny there. Got my curly braces are whacked out. Let's just move that up. There we go. And I'm going to say from the bottom 0 pixels and from the right 0 pixels. I'm going to go ahead and give this button a big width and height. 60 pixels of width and a height of about 50 pixels. I want this button to be big enough, regardless of whether I use a hamburger icon or some text. I want it to be big enough for a fingertip, finger pad. And I think usually if you go at least 45 by 45, you're probably fine. So a little bigger than that sounds great to me. So I'm going to go ahead and choose that. And let's go ahead and do a few other things on here, I suppose. Border 4 pixels, outset, and I'll just choose some dark coloring. And I can see where that button is showing up. However, I want it to be just beyond the stage there. So for position, for the bottom, I'm going to choose 64 pixels. Actually, I want it to go below the bottom. This would put it above the bottom. So I'm going to do negative 64 pixels. And that's going to push that button downward. And then from the right, I don't know, I'll try something like 16 pixels. And that should push it over a little bit. Okay, I'm pretty satisfied with that. So this is just the start of setting the stage for this mobile menu. And obviously I'm not doing anything too exciting here. These could easily be the same for PhoneFrames 2 and 3. I'll take care of that later on. But now I'm just looking at this button. And there's definitely going to need to be some kind of control on there, whether it's below the menu or off to the side of the menu and things like that. Now back to that height for a moment. I chose a height of 80% because obviously if I did something like a height of 100%, that's not going to work out because then the user's not going to have easy access to that close button. So when you don't know that height, you have to be prepared. Now we could try something interesting, I suppose, where we took the height of this and we put in a calculation using the calc function. We could do something like 100% minus some value. Well, I know my button is about 60 pixels tall. I know I want it to be roughly 4 pixels past that. We could say minus 70 pixels. So let's make sure I'm refreshed. There we go. And this would help ensure, regardless of the height available, that the height of our nav stage is taking up almost the full width, but always allocating enough height for that button. And if we wanted to ease back on that, we certainly could. Maybe I'll just say 100 pixels. So that we can see that that button is always going to be visible at the bottom of that nav stage. So that's what I want to do in this next phase of this assignment, is I just want to kind of set up my various stages. Now, the other thing I think I will start to do off screen, or off recorder I mean, is start to populate these with the unordered list. Basically, in each of these, I'm going to have a set of unordered lists. There's going to be some list items, don't have to be that fancy, anchors, hyperreference, hashtags, menu item 1. These will be pretty generic. Copy, paste, 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 paste. However many seems appropriate. Now let's base it off some reality though. So I'm not going to do any styling of those nav menus, but I do want to get my stages set up, put in the generic nav menus, list items I mean, and then we can start to customize them. Now before we start work on that, we do want to have a clear understanding of what websites are doing. So I have a few mobile websites open, and there's a lot of similarities. So don't feel like, oh, you're going to have to do some real fancy styling for a good navigation menu. Key for a good navigation menu, simple, big areas that you can tap on with your finger, and of course, easy to read. So here's one at a particular website, and you'll see this little hamburger icon is a common way to go. So yep, nice little drop-down approach. Now there looks like they're allowing for a little bit of space on the left and the right. That's kind of nice. Some menus will cover up the entire interface. Now this menu is pretty long, and I can continue to scroll down and see more, but that's pretty reasonable, I suppose. So this nav menu is centered horizontally in the viewport. Yeah, I think that looks good. It reminds the user that this nav menu is covering up the content, and they say, oh, okay, so that content is certainly there. I'm sure once I click on this item, it's going to go to a new page, and the nav menu will automatically be hidden. Great. Went to this other website. Once again, hamburger icon. This hamburger icon's over on the left. This one also just kind of appears. It may be dropping down, but it's going so fast it just seems to appear. Now this one's covering up the full amount of space, and I can just tap on that same button again in order to hide the menu. Now there's this little X down here, but I think that's all for their live chat. So yeah, it's a pretty good way to go. Now this menu has some expandable parts to it. That's pretty nice. That'd be something nice to work on. And their menu is taking up the full space regardless of the height of the menu. Great. Jumped over to Worthy Brewing. Another menu here where nice little animation on the hamburger icon. It closes. Now this one I couldn't scroll down on the nav menu. However, I was concerned about that, but that's just a bug. I went to the nav menu on my phone, and I was easily able to scroll. Oh, where is that? There's the menu. I was easily able to scroll on my phone, so it just must be a little bug on the emulator where I couldn't do that. So can't hold that against them. But yeah, so they've got a really big menu, once again, showing from the top. I wanted to find a menu where it shows from the left or the right. This is over at 10 Barrel. And this is weird. They went for a 2-line hamburger icon. Hamburger icons are traditionally 3, but I guess they're trying to be more efficient. So now this one I wanted to show just as I don't think it's a good way to go. They got a little bit too much wackiness going on, a little too much animation, I think. So we got the logo was animating, we got this line animating, we got the menu items coming from one side, slight delay after the bullets are there. No need to go overboard on animating that stuff. But otherwise, once it's displayed, it's a pretty clear looking menu. So I like the look of it. I like the big chunky fonts, but yeah, a little bit overly animated. And finally, I found one, Monkless Brewing, Monkless Belgian Ales, and they had a nice menu where it slides out from the side. So I just wanted to see if I could find an example there, and that's a nice way to go. It slides out, and pretty nice big menu items. Probably could use a little bit more contrast, and they could obviously be a little bit bigger, I think, but still looks pretty nice. There's a clear X for me to close that menu so that I can explore the website. So cool. What do we see from these navigation menus? Well, there's a lot of overlap in styles, certainly. Do they slide down from the top? Seems most of them do, but we can have them slide in from the left. That's certainly an option. There's always a place where the user can clearly hide that menu. I do like it when the menu button changes to an X to make it really obvious. This is going to close the menu. You clicked it before, so yeah, we definitely want to do that kind of thing with our hamburger icons. And certainly, by the way, those hamburger icons do seem to be the most common way to indicate that there is a menu available. So we want to use that iconography in order to indicate menu, because that's the standard, and people come to expect that, I believe. So yeah, so that's our plan. So what are we going to work on next? Well, when I turn off the recorder here, I'm going to continue to do a little bit more to my assignment page. So basically, I want to put working stages on each of these. I think for my biggest phone model here, I'm going to demonstrate one where it probably ends up sliding in from the left. So I think I'm probably going to adjust some of this staging area so that it's not taking up the full width, and my close button can hide out over here on the right side. And I think for the medium and the smaller phone interfaces, I'll rig it so that maybe one of them, the button is down at the bottom, kind of like what I have on the first one. And one of these, I think I want to keep it so that the menu button is all at the top all the time. In fact, that seemed to be a pretty popular one for all of these. Notice the button is right where it started, staying at the top. Button is right where it starts, stays at the top. That is a pretty common way to go regardless, and that's kind of nice. So the user can rely on, they just tapped up there to get to the menu. Let's not make it too tricky, and now I'm already starting to wonder if maybe we shouldn't be moving this button around too much, and maybe having this close button show down up at the bottom is a little bit unusual. So yeah, so I think I'll just start to establish the stages for these, put in the generic nav menu items. I'll probably go ahead and just rename them or something, and then we'll pick back up in another video so that we can really start to focus our attention on styling the nav menu items for one or two of these. So catch up with you in the next video.